Hey, coming up on this new episode of the Last Minute Blues podcast with Donny Fandango and Jeremy Rutherford, we are going to talk Jimmy Snuggerud contract projections. What could this new deal look like for him? And we dive into the anatomy of the draft and some of the draft picks and guys that they didn't select. New episode coming now.
This is the Last Minute Blues podcast with Alex Ferrario, Donny Fandango, and Jeremy Rutherford on your home of the St. Louis Blues, 101 ESPN.
It is the Last Minute Blues podcast. We are in the Jeff Burton studios live.
Shirt on. Yeah, Jeff Burton shirt, baby.
Oh, that's right.
We've been talking so much to each other, forgot what we were wearing.
No, that's not even it. I'm just not very bright. That's really all that it is. Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN, Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. Gentlemen, it's great to friggin' see you both
I feel
here,
like
man.
this guy's been in witness protection. I haven't seen this guy in like a month and a half.
I was going to start out the podcast today by bitching about people backing into parking spots, which is like one of my least favorite things on the planet. But then I had an unbelievable chicken breakfast scramble from Chick-fil-A.
Smelled that when I walked in.
And dude, my mood is just completely done a 180. I'm just ready to talk some hockey. I don't care how you park your
Turn
car.
to that camera and tell Chick-fil-A we're wanting you right now on the Last Minute
We'd appreciate it. Again, just do the breakfast stuff. It's delicious. So, guys, first of all, we're at, really probably the slowest part of the offseason.
The worst part of the offseason.
I mean, there is just not a lot going on. And outside of really Macklin Celebrini signing that big deal a week or so ago, things around the NHL have really kind of slowed to a crawl. But one of the things that I've kind of been thinking about, just to jump right into it, was when I saw Leo Carlsson get the offer sheet from Philadelphia, then sign the deal with Anaheim, and then not very long after that, Celebrini signed his deal, I got to start thinking, who is going to be the Blues player, the first Blues player that's going to cash in on this new wave of money that's coming into the NHL? And that person, to me, is obviously one Jimmy Snuggerud. And so I'm just sort of kind of curious, guys, what you think about, what you think a deal for Snuggie is going to eventually look like. I also kind of want to talk about the timing of all of this, because I would think right now, if you're the Blues, you would probably want to get a guy like Snuggerud locked up for a while. But if you're Jimmy, maybe you're like, whoa, fellas, we don't even know what I can do here yet. Maybe I don't want to sign a deal. So I just kind of wanted to kick around, who you guys think will be the first Blues player to really cash in this new, flush with salary cap money and all this in the NHL. I would assume it's going to be Snuggerud, but maybe there might be somebody else here that I'm missing. What do you guys think that deal looks like? Just kind of kick around. What do you think about it?
I think before we beat up the numbers and talk about what it could look like, I think we got to provide some context to Snuggerud's situation. Is that when he signed a couple years ago, when he left Minnesota, it's a 3-year entry-level deal. And as soon as he plays that first game with the Blues, which he did, he played 7 at the end of the regular season, then, of course, that Winnipeg playoff series. But as soon as he plays that first game, he burns that first year. So then last year was year 2 of that contract, 21 goals, 51 points, 70 games. And then now this year is going to be year 3. So he's going to be entering the 3rd year of that 3-year entry-level deal. And the thing is, the way the rules go is that as of this past July 1st, he's now eligible, because he's within the 1 year of his contract expiring, he's eligible to sign a contract extension. So he doesn't need a contract for this season, but they can agree to, announce, come to terms on a contract that will start not this coming season, but the year after. And so when we talk about a Jimmy Snuggerud contract, what it could look like, how long it's going to be, what the money could look like, this is going to be a deal that starts not this coming year, but for 27, 28.
Okay, and before we get there, how long do the Blues have control over Snuggerud as like an RFA? You know what I'm saying?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Well, you have to put 7 years into the league. It's different for different players, depends how old you were when you signed. He came out of college, but typically it's 7 years or age 27 until you become UFA.
Okay.
And he's just 22 now.
Okay.
This would look so much more professional if I had my laptop in front of me rather than looking at this, but I'm on Puckpedia right now to see what it looks like. And I believe, JR said, so basically up till he's 28 years old is what you have control over. So when he's 28, which would be 6 years from now is when he would be an unrestricted free agent.
Okay. So the Blues do have a little bit of wiggle room here.
Like this isn't the Matthew Tkachuk situation where you're going to sign him to a 1-year deal and he's going to walk up to free agency. Like my guess is in this scenario, and it's total guess here, if you're Snuggerud, you're going to try and walk this up to be a free agent again before you're the age of 30. And so if you're an unrestricted free agent at 28, you've got 6 years of that right now. My guess is, and just from the agent's perspective, you'd be looking at this saying, all right, well, if you're going to sign a contract extension, let's go no more than 8 years, or let's not go past 7 years, because you take 7 years. Yeah, you're buying out some time of 1 year of free agency, but you're still going to be 29 and you're going to be a great goal scorer. I would imagine the agent tells him in the National Hockey League, you can still make a long-term big contract. But like for me, I always go through player comps of what others have signed. And like I look at other guys because I assume, and you talk to more agents than I do, JR, I assume that's how agents work on this, right? They see other clients sign and they say, well, my guy is right in the same wheelhouse as this player, so he should get a similar contract to that. So there were 2 players this offseason that I looked at and I said, those are really similar to what I think Snuggerud can do. One is Ivan Demidov from the Montreal Canadiens. He signed an 8-year, I think it's $9 million AAV. He's played 1 full season in the National Hockey League. If you look at his point production, it is eerily similar to Jimmy Snuggerud because Snuggerud missed 12 games last year. And he also played a portion of that first season in the playoffs. So he was in the same boat that Jimmy Snuggerud's in, to where he had 1 year left and then he signed that big contract to stay with them. The other one is Pavel Dorofeyev, who was the offer sheet candidate that was traded to New York that made $11 million AAV. And see, the difference there for me is Dorofeyev scored 40 goals or was close to 40 goals. I think when you hit 40 goals, then you're going to be expensive. Whereas Demidov scored like 25, I think, but was about a 70-point producer. So to me, I think if you're Snuggerud side, I don't know the year. That's the part that's confusing to me. But I think you're looking at somewhere between $8 to $11 million, and it comes down to what this season does for him. If you're 40 goals, you're talking double digits. But if you're a 20 to 30 goal scorer, but you're a guy that's producing in every area, maybe you're talking about $9 million.
So you're saying 7 years between 8 and 11.
That's what maybe, because I could see a scenario, and I mean, JR, you did great work in your article today on The Athletic. I could see a scenario where you look at it and you say, you go 5, right? You go 4, and then you do the other where you're still a restricted free agent, but you have the opportunity for offer sheets. And that's the part I find fascinating. I have to imagine an agent is giving the perspective to the player of like, look, man, cap's going up. League is wild. If you're a guy that can score 30 to 40 goals, offer sheets are going to be there. So if you want to make the most money possible, that might be the path to go, to always have that restricted free agency tied to you. Yes, the Blues are controlling your outcome, but the offer sheets are there. So the term is the part for me, or the length is the part for me that I am fascinated to find out, because I can make a case for a 3 to 4 year deal, and I can make a case for a 7 to 8 year deal.
Yeah, I just think that the one thing we have to point out too is, and Alex mentioned 7-year deal, mentioned 8-year deal. So currently in the current CBA, you can sign your own player to 8 years. That's going to change September 16th. The new CBA kicks in, and the max term that you can sign your own player to is 7 years. So if the Blues want to get an 8-year deal, if Snuggerud wants to get an 8-year deal, they've got till September 15th to get that deal done. Yeah. But you know, in kind of doing some research for this article, like Alex mentioned, is up at The Athletic today about the Snuggerud contract situation. You know, to me, for a guy like him, with the cap growing, 104 this year, right, going up to 113.5 perhaps next year, we haven't seen that cap growth, you know, in a number of years. And so whereas 6, 7, 8 years ago, it made sense for a player to, hey, give me that 8-year deal, because the cap's not going up. Teams aren't going to be offering more money year by year in the future. I'll take that 8-year deal. Well, now what do you see? And I know these guys are superstars, but you see Bedard, you see Celebrini, you see Carlson with the offer sheet, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. Yeah. So if I'm Jimmy Snuggerud, and let's hypothetically say that they get a deal done before the season starts or in season, you know, if I'm him, I'm looking at a 5-year deal, because you're you're not going to get UFA money in terms of the dollars. They're not buying out UFA years yet, so you're still restricted. But I think that they're going to pay you what you're potentially worth here. I think they see that they want to lock you up for 5 years. And then when you're, 27 years old, 28, however long that deal is, hey, you've got another kick at the can, like Alex said, still in your 20s. Maybe by that time you got 2 40-goal seasons, and the cap's going to be at whatever, 118, 120, 122.
And if you're 27 years old at that time, you sign a 7-year deal and you're locked up until you're 34 years old and make a ton of money.
Well, but also too, man, if you sign a 5,
you're 32 and you can sign another one.
And you can you could potentially do it again.
Yeah.
I'm just completely fascinated by how this changes with this cap continuing to go.
Yeah, and the revenue's going up, and so after years of the stagnant cap because COVID and so on and so forth, now you're seeing that boon, and in the article, I referenced the fact that Celebrini is 18.8 per year, and Bedard's 15.
Yeah,
he went lower. Carlson's 18. That was the offer sheet, though. Jimmy Snuggerud is not in their rarefied air yet.
Right.
Like, those guys were top overall pick, number 2 overall pick.
And they played the center position, which is a valuable position in the NHL.
Yeah, and look, Bedard, 30-goal season. You look at Celebrini, 115 points. Like, if Snuggerud had 30 goals last year, if he had 115 points, look, we'd be having a different conversation here. So I want to stress that these guys are superstars and top overall picks. Jimmy Snuggerud, pick in the early 20s. Was he 23 overall? It's a situation where if, like Alex said, he goes out and has that 40-goal season this year, instead of $8 million, you could be looking at $10 million, $10 million plus. And that's where the intrigue comes for me, is when do the Blues, and it takes 2 to put this together, so it's not just when the Blues want to do it, but do the Blues see enough in Snuggerud already to say, hey, look, whatever it is, 5 years, 6 years, we want to get it done right now. If that costs us $7 million, $8 million, whatever, and we know you're restricted, we're ready to commit to that. Do they want to offer that and try to get that type of deal done before he has the chance to go out and score 40
Didn't they do that with Vladdy? Wasn't Vladdy an RFA at the time, and they kind of banked on it, and they said, you know what, this guy's going to be good.
Yeah, he's 60 million, yeah.
64 mil, I think it was at the time.
Yeah, I think they were convinced enough that, okay, he's going to be the guy.
Yeah, you maybe had 2 years of that at the time, so maybe a little bit of a different spot. But the other factor into this too is, like, you have to take the player into perspective, because Cutter Gauthier right now is a perfect example of the guy that just wants to make the most money possible.
Yeah.
Like $18 million he's demanding because he saw Leo Carlsson. I don't get that same vibe with Jimmy Snuggerud.
Yeah.
And this goes to the point that we always talk about of when you get the player to St. Louis, you sell them on St. Louis and then they don't want to leave. You do wonder if Snuggerud looks around and sees Thomas making 8, Holloway making 8, Broberg making 8. If he looks at it and says, well, this is a group I want to be a part of, and if we want to make this thing competitive, $8, $9, $10 million, I'm staying here. I'm not breaking the bank, but I'm also not putting the team in a bad spot. But if I'm Jimmy Snuggerud, I'm making $10 million and I'm going to be a part of this team. So that's the part, like, because teams always have that threshold of, like, we're not going to pay a player more than this guy, right? Celebrini, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, Barkov with the Florida Panthers. I wonder if Jimmy Snuggerud looks at the Blues when that contract comes up and says, look, this is good money for me, but it's also keeping this team competitive in the same wheelhouse as all of these other players.
Do you think that the Blues are trying to maybe sort of emulate the Montreal Canadiens model, where they seemingly have all of their guys locked up in the 8 to sort of $9.5, $10 million range? It just seems like across the board on that payroll, it's a pretty darn flat line with all of their star guys. It seems like that would be something that the Blues are trying to emulate.
Yeah,
maybe.
I think so. And that's a environment that all GMs want to create, right?
Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely.
everybody makes $9 million.
And it does seem like there are teams out there that kind of have that. Like, I realize, Sidney Crosby has hundreds in his couch cushion, but it took
more like millions in his couch cushion
for years. I mean, there's teams like that, and Montreal's done a great job of creating that. Players who want to be a part of something. I agree with Alex on Snuggerud. I never ever want to speak for players. Like, I don't know know them to the point where I know what they would accept or not accept. But, he strikes you as a guy who wants to be part of something and sees that this is growing. And if they can get everybody signed at a reasonable price, that they can add more players and be successful. The one thing I was telling Donnie this before we got going, Alex, is, there's so much hype and so much talk when a guy's contract's due, whether it's Broberg. And sometimes I feel like I, fall into it too, into the trap of 11 million. 12 million, and then all of a sudden he comes in at 8. You're like, what? Right. 6 years, 8. Like, how did this happen? And then Holloway, yes, he's had the injury situation, but I was still a little surprised to see 7.75. And, it's a great job by the Blues and getting those contracts done. And it's, a good job by the players to be accepting of it. But I just feel like we're going to talk about Jimmy Snuggerud and say 10 million, 11 million, 12 million. If he scores 43 goals, are we talking 13 million? Like, what are we talking here? And then all of a sudden there's going to be a press release come out that says, Snuggerud 8.125.
Yeah. Well, dude, and we talked about this too, man. We get drunk with our own players. Yep. Like I know I do. And in my mind right now, Jimmy Snuggerud is very, very high. I think very highly of the young man.
You've had a lot of tequila on Jimmy Snuggerud is what you're saying.
So we do get a little drunk with it, and it's up to that Blues front office to be like, whoa, guys.
Well, and that's what I was going to say too. Like, at what point, and I know Steen is the one in charge right now, but Doug's still a part of this. At what point did you ever feel like Doug Armstrong overpaid for a player? Now, there have been times where you haven't met the ask for the player, the Alex Pietrangelo situation, probably the most popular, but I never really feel like they've gotten to the point where you see a contract for your player and be like, oh man, that was way too much money.
Yeah, it was probably never overpaid in terms of money and AAV, hence
length.
It's the length.
Yeah. I was thinking Booch was what I wouldn't say that the money that he's paid is too much. It's just that term.
Well, it was the term, and I think the contract itself was questionable at the time, but the length is the part for me. Nick Leddy's length, I think there were people questioning.
I mean, you could say Torrey Krug. You could say
Fowler as well. But again, that's a guy who's 30, 31 years old signing a contract versus a kid who's going to be 22 years old.
Yeah.
I think you're happy if he signs a 7 or 8 year deal at this point. It's the AAV, and that's the part that it's just kind of comfortability where it's like, man, I trust them in that sense. They seem to always get those deals done. And for a guy like Snuggerud, they're not just going to let him walk out the door because he's too expensive.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. And I just think perfect scenario for, obviously you want to see Snuggerud if he puts up the numbers to get paid. But a 5-year deal, is it $8.5 million, maybe $9 million with the rising cap, and then he's got a chance, in 5 years to get another deal. And, the Blues get the great 5 years of his career in terms of him being a part of this thing. And then obviously another chance to sign him down the road. So that would be my guess as to what could happen.
So as far as Snuggerud, Neighbors, I think even Mayu can be put into this. Hofer. Who do you guys see? And I think I asked you this either last pod or the pod before. Who's the first one of this bunch that gets signed to a long-term deal?
If I had to shoot my shot now, mine would be Neighbors.
Okay.
I think it's either Neighbors or Hofer. And to me, I feel like Neighbors is the contract that isn't going to be difficult to get done. Not saying Neighbors is going to be an easy guy to pay. I just think it's one of those that Neighbors loves the Blues. I think he's going to want to be there. But I also have to put Hofer in that because you have no other goalie in your system. Like, man, if you're Joel Hofer, you know where you're at as an organization, and it's like you're going to pay me. But you, as the Blues, know where things are going with Binnington. Your depth is questionable right now.
Questionable is nice.
That's a very kind way of putting it. Like, Joel Hofer seems like the one that they're going to look at and be like, we're going to get this one locked up so we know where it is.
And I would add that it's different with a goalie, right? Because the volatility of the position.
Yeah.
Like, you can play well for a year or two, but then if you hit the can, teams look to move on from you. And so, the last situation with Jordan Binnington was different because he won a Stanley Cup. So it's like, okay, what do you want?
Right.
6 times 6. All right. Here's your $36 million. If I'm Joel Hofer and I'm coming up, what's he making? 375 or something right now? Like does $5 million, $6 million get it done? Maybe not. Because the cap's rising, and if he's going to be 1A for the next, however many years, maybe he wants more than $5-6 million. But if if you're him and you're the Blues and they come at you with a 6-year deal, and let's say it's for $6 million, I think that's something I consider if I'm Joel.
The security of it.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's not $8, $9, $10 million like some goaltenders are getting paid, but you're talking 6 years and you didn't win the cup that Jordan Binnington won.
Right. That one in particular is starting to make me a little antsy. And I have no reason to be, but that's just how I live my life. But I mean, you talked about it, Alex, outside of Binner, who honestly, this is his last year here.
It feels that way.
God bless him. He's going to go on somewhere else to try to be a 1A. He should. Great. But outside of that, what do we got? We don't have a lot. So I just want to make sure that they get that dude locked down, because as we saw numerous times last year after that first, couple of weeks of the season, Hofer was freaking amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. So I would feel better if they got him locked down.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about Hofer too is there's no market to tie it to. Like, look at there's just guys that don't make a lot of money as goalies. Like, what's Connor Hellebuck? Bobrovsky was the one that was making the most. It was like 10 mil, but Hellebuck's around 9, like Vasilevsky's around 9. Like, goalies just don't get to the 13, 14, 15 million dollars. And the thing about Hofer is, who's the last young goalie that's coming off of an incredible year that got a big contract extension? Like, they just don't happen that often.
They really don't.
Not long.
And I think he's the guy that's going to set the market for the next turn of them. Like, Jake Ottinger's the last one that signed, which was about 8 mil. And then Hellebuck got his, who was a little bit older. But you've got Jet Greaves, who just signed with the Columbus Blue Jackets. You've got Carter Hart, who got back into the league.
Greaves, $5 million.
Yeah. So I think Hofer's going to be the guy that kind of sets the market for what it's going to look like for that next wave of goaltending. And I will give the Blues depth goalies a little bit more credit than what I said early, because Romanoff was really good last year. That's the guy that kind of helped them get to the second round of the playoffs in the AHL. I'll be curious what he looks like. And then they did get the one kid that they drafted from Sweden, that Löv Härenstam.
Yeah.
And then they got the guy from the Islanders, that Gildoff, who's a big mofo out there in between the puck, 6'7". So they've got guys. It's just you're not seeing them at the same development stage that Colton Ellis was at last year. So you're still about 3-4 years away, other than Romanov, before you start to see that next wave of goalies. So that's why I think Hofer's the one you get locked up right away, because you got a 5-year window that if you're wanting to be competitive, you got to have the goalie.
Yeah, and you were talking about Hofer. We all can go back to last season where he, for about a month there, he struggled. But since that point in the season, November, he had some of the best numbers in the entire league. And listen, nobody wants to see him go through that. At the time, you're questioning, can this guy really be the starting goalie for the Blues when Binnington leaves? To me, because he went through that, and the way he came out of it shows me more than you could show me any stats you want, show me any saves you want, show me any of that. None of that matters compared to what I witnessed with him crawling out of that hole.
If it would have been the reverse, where he started off like he ended and ended the season poorly, then I'd be a little bit more concerned. But the fact that you did what you did, that's a great point, JR.
All right, so let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's come back. I want to talk about the really tremendous job that Blue Note Productions did with the anatomy of the draft. We'll talk a little bit about that next on the Last Minute Blues podcast. All right, so first of all, Blue Note Productions did an absolutely ridiculously phenomenal job with this anatomy of the draft thing that you can access through the Blues website or on their YouTube channel. Alex, you brought it to my attention. I saw them posting about it, but then just had never, I hadn't had a chance to watch it until last night and this morning. And it is so incredible when you are just a fly on that wall for a little while you're watching these guys talk about the draft. One of the things that was very apparent to me, and everybody in the room, obviously their opinion really matters, but man, Keith Tkachuk was a constant throughout that sort of thing. And now he's senior advisor to Alexander
Doug Armstrong.
To Doug Armstrong. So is there a path here that you see, and this isn't the big takeaway from the anatomy of the draft, I'm just one of the things I thought about, but is Big Walt working towards maybe being a GM or something along those lines?
I'd say no. I think Big Walt's got the perfect job for Big Walt, right? To where, and look, that's not discrediting anything he does. I mean, he was a big proponent for Robert Thomas in the draft. Like, I think I remember Curbs telling the story that Big Walt said, like, hey, Robert Thomas is going to be looked back as a guy that should have went in the top 5 of that draft. I know that he has worked a lot in terms of identifying talent on the college level. So I just think Big Walt is the type of guy that is the perfect voice to have in a locker or in a front office, but doesn't want the day-to-day work of what Alex Steen or Doug Armstrong have gone through, if that makes sense.
So he can kind of like, so I mean, he can kind of, hey, you know, I'm going to go on the road and scout prospects for 2 weeks, and then I'm going to take a week, and I'm going to go down to Florida and watch The Voice for a week, and then I'm going to go and, is that kind of sort of how his...
Yeah, and that just wouldn't be possible if he was in a full-time front office.
Because it's the everyday grind.
We've heard Doug's schedule on this podcast where it's like, oh, I got to go to Czechoslovakia, and I got to go to Finland, and I got, like, your day-to-day is just always on the road. Yeah, that's not Big Walt.
How about Big Walt says to Alex, he goes, hey, listen, I'll scout whoever Florida's playing for the next month.
How about you post me on Florida? Let me know if you want to make a deal with Tampa or the Panthers.
It's so fascinating to me how everybody in that room has a voice and has a voice that matters, but then how Alex and Doug have to filter all of this information, all of these opinions. It was just so striking to me to see them sort of maybe not get along at some points, not agree. What struck you guys about watching?
Well, to that point, that was the first thing that hit me was, and I understand, like, you got to do good cop, bad cop in that spot. And I think Doug even said it in the anatomy of the draft, where it's like, guys, look, I'm not trying to be a jerk. My job is to poke and prod as much as possible. But he and Feltrin were going back and forth, and I believe it was for that 11th overall pick selection, to where, you know, Doug was talking about, like, why are we getting hyped? Why is this guy jumped up this much just because he got a little bit bigger? Like, what are we missing on this one? And Feltrin kind of responded with, like, hey, I've watched this guy. I know what I'm talking about. And so, like, that was a part for me that it's like, oh, damn, like some hostility. But that's exactly what you want your general manager and president of hockey ops to do, right? To push back and be like, why are we doing this? What are we missing here? What hole did we look over on this one? And you know, the more that one went on, I know there's been a lot of speculation from listeners of, you know, oh, they were talking about Wyatt Cullen or the Finnish kid Savanto and deciding between those guys and Ty Lawrence. We don't know who they were deciding on, but I found it fascinating that they were really going back and forth with each other on this guy or Ty Lawrence. And Ty Lawrence is obviously who they settled on because the majority kind of ruled. But we always talk about Tony Feltrin and the guy, how much we trust him. Feltrin wanted somebody else for number 11. It seemed in that video where a lot of people in that locker room or in that front office group wanted Ty Lawrence at number 11. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you go to the trade for Mason McTavish. And to me, that's, you know, when you cover the team, you're always wishing you could be a fly on the wall because you want to see, how does that stuff come together? How early in advance do they know these things? Well, that night of the draft, when that Mason McTavish trade happened, you know, I was talking to a couple people, not within the Blues organization, but around the league, and hearing that, yes, this deal is on the table. And if Anaheim's guy is still there when they are up at number 15, this deal's going to go through. So at 13, you're thinking, okay, you know, the Blues can announce a trade here shortly. So then to see it on video where Doug is telling the rest of his team, hey, if Anaheim's guy is still there, we're going to make this deal. And then you see the kind of the reaction that the Blues got Mason McTavish. You see the scouts who've worked their entire year and they'd love to make all 4 of these picks. And then now all of a sudden 15 and 29 are,
some of them are
gone.
Sitting there going, son of a, I was in Finland for 3 months and you're going to trade that pick for this?
Could you imagine that? And so then the trade's made, and then now the Blues are back on the board at 16. And this is a pick, you know, I think that has come under some question.
Real quick though, before that pick, I'm glad you mentioned the McTavish one, because to me, it didn't hit me in the moment, because we even talked to Doug the night of the draft that told us that if Klepov wasn't selected, we weren't making that McTavish deal. Or if he would have been selected before Anaheim, they weren't making that deal. it hit me more watching that video that it was like, damn, for how excited we are about this team and what they just got at McTavish, none of that could have happened. Like, how would we be reacting to the Blues right now if the McTavish deal never went down because Klepov was taken and the Blues did make 4 selections?
It's surprising to me that it could come down to that one player who's a roll of a dice. Like,
yes.
Do you want to move McTavish or do you not want to move him? You're getting another first-round pick, and there's not another player in that draft that you wouldn't take in that position. So that
because we've heard Doug say like they have a list of players that are all in that same window, because we heard them almost make a deal with New Jersey where, what was it? It was trading back into the second round and then getting a later
basically to move up from
11 to 9 or something,
move up a couple spots.
But they were losing the late first round pick, which is what helped them get the McTavish deal. And that was like a 2-minute thought where it was like, yeah, we're not doing this, and then called them back and said no. But like, we always hear him say there's guys in the same window, so if one goes here, we're still going to get the same player.
There's no sense in moving back with your other picks just to move up a couple spots. You know, if there's not a guy on the board that you're going up. No,
because the one you were getting to is the one that probably is going to get my blood boiling.
Well, then you get to 16 and you hear, Maddox Dejanay, and you're like, okay, well, he was like, as they say in the anatomy of the draft, a lot of the mocks, he was late 20s, and here he goes at 16. But, when you hear the scouts and they get paid to do the work, make the drive to these games and watch the kid play, they talk about that size, that grit, that factor that he has. And then you hear Keith Tkachuk, you were talking about Big Walt earlier.
Said he thinks he's a 40-goal scorer.
40-goal scorer. And listen, there's a lot that gets thrown around when you're around a hockey team every day. I've been around coaches who think this player is going to be the next so-and-so, and he doesn't turn out to be that way. There's people with very valued opinions, and those opinions years later I see didn't turn out the way this respected person told me it probably would. But when it comes to Keith Tkachuk telling me that he thinks a guy is going to be capable of, why would you not believe that?
When in the same video we heard them talking about how it's amazing that he's going to the Hall of Fame, and it's like, well, yeah, the Hall of Famer's saying he's going to be a 40-goal scorer. I'll listen to that one. Now, I'm going to preface everything I say right here, Donnie, because I might get a little Donnie on this one. Yeah. My blood boils.
I like it when it's not me.
This is going to be very out of character for me, but I'll preface everything I say by, look, I give them the benefit of doubt because this group has clicked almost every time they've selected somebody in the first round. So when I hear Tkachuk say Maddox Dejanay's got the chance to be a 40-goal scorer, and I understand they're prioritizing the center position, I give you the benefit of doubt. With that being said, I was so upset that night because Ethan Belchez was there for them. And to me, that felt like the perfect draft. Now, I don't know who they were talking about. Maybe they were talking about a completely different player. But in that anatomy of the draft, I heard, I think it was Doug, mention a couple of times, like, are we sure we want to go with this just because he's a center? And maybe it's just my love for him, felt like they were talking about Belchez or this Maddox Dejanay. Yeah. And then when I saw in the World Juniors play exhibition games that they were playing, and Belchez was a top line, and you saw how that draft went, I looked at it and I'm like, you passed on this. And I understand you got a lot of wingers, but my God, everything they've said about Belchez and how he fights for everything, he wants to get to the NHL, he's a dog on the bone. It's like, that's the Blues. But then when I heard Tkachuk say 40 goals, and Feltrin was the one that, when it came down to it, I think in the draft room, they looked at him and said, are you sure you want to go with this guy? And he said, yep, that's our guy, Maddox Dejanay. So now I'm going to have to always compare Dejanay to Ethan Belchez.
Well, and Belchez, what did he go? He
went the next pick to Utah.
But I mean, a lot of teams pass on him up even to the Blues. So
and that's fair. Yeah. That's level-headed thinking, JR, and I'm doing that right now. I'm thinking more with my heart than my brain, so you need to calm down.
Again, it's just great when it's not me.
And everything I'm upset about with Belchez, like, he's 6'5", he's 200-something pounds. They got that in the center position. But when you get a fascination with the player, you stick with it. Yeah. And when then you see him go the next damn pick, I'm like, why did you do this? But I also put too much investment into mock draft, so unfortunately for me, I will be that fan that for the next 5 years will always compare one prospect to the other. And if Dejanay is better than Belchez, I never said any of this. We'll wipe this clean.
Well,
but if Belches is better, my gosh, I'm going to.
You won't be the first fan to do that.
That's very true.
I honestly, if you've got 30 minutes and can sit down and watch this anatomy of the draft that Blue Note Productions
Well worth
put
your
out,
time.
It is so well worth your time. And I'll tell you the other thing that it gets me excited about with the NHL getting ready to take over the Blues broadcasts.
Yes.
Doesn't that mean a bigger role for Blue Note Productions in those broadcasts?
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
It can certainly, because they have control over all the content.
Okay.
And you know, there's so many people over there
Yeah.
that do such a good job with Blue Note that you don't want to single out anybody, but Trevor Nickerson, you know, heads the department, and he's been given a lot of leeway by the team to be able to produce those types of videos. I mean, everything from David Perron's welcome back video to everything they do over there is just phenomenal. And it is exciting to think that the Blues broadcast will now likely have a lot more content that's given the access that the Blues will allow it to have now that they have their in-house production company doing a lot of the work.
Well, it kind of just brings me back to a couple of years ago when Amazon was able to go into like the Oilers locker room during the finals.
Oh, yeah, the one where
everybody
McDavid was
heard
pissed.
The McDavid freak out. Whoa. But it was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, just freaking amazing to watch the best player in the world completely losing his ish. Like, Ian, just more of those kinds of things as a fan.
It's the behind the scenes stuff. And that's why I think so many people love the Athletic subscription, because you have so many incredible writers that get that. But yes, to have Blue Note Productions and have that element a part of the broadcast, I think it's what I believe the Cardinals have done so well this year with some of the in-game interviews and the pieces that they put together. Now you're going to get that for the Blues, and for where the Blues lifespan is at right now. Oh man, for how much anticipation is going to be with this, that's where I think people are really going to gravitate.
Do you guys have any idea, like, when we might know, like, so I can download the app and, like, you know, like, I want to get this going.
I'll tell you this. It's going to be before a game is played in the regular season, Donnie.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Yeah.
We're going to take one more break and finish up with the Last Minute Blues podcast. Final segment here of the Last Minute Blues podcast. I'll tell you one of the things going into this offseason that I was legit concerned about, because, you know, I'm a worrier, is whether or not what had happened at the trade deadline was going to sort of linger for Colton Parayko and for Robert Thomas. Was this going to be something that wasn't actually taken care of at the deadline, that was just going to kind of hover and linger? But in reading your piece with Robert Thomas from a couple of weeks ago, it seems like he is in a fantastic place with this organization, that he and Alex Steen, you know, kind of talked about the things, but it just feels like that at this point is a dead issue. And as a Blues fan, that is a massive freaking relief.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of times where, Alex, you sit down and you talk to a player about a touchy subject, you know, something like what we saw Robert Thomas go through at the deadline. And, you know, they're going to give you the players speak, and they're going to take the high road and things like that. And you can kind of see through it. And sometimes you'll even, you know, when the interview's over, you're walking back, you know, to your car or whatever, and you talk off the record, and they'll say, yeah, it was pretty crappy. And they'll give you the honest truth. But with Robert Thomas, talking to him at the park that day, he seemed genuine throughout the interview, said the same things after the interview, so on and so forth. I really do think that, you know, he's in a good spot with the Blues, regardless of what happened. I will say this. I think that it helps that there's a transition with the general manager from Doug Armstrong to Alexander Steen. And that is no disrespect whatsoever to Doug Armstrong. We all know what a phenomenal job he does, and he's done for a long time. However, when you listen to Robert Thomas talk about his relationship with Alexander Steen and talk about their conversations that they had this offseason that got Robert Thomas excited about the direction of the team and what kind of part he could have in it, I don't think that you could have that with the quote unquote old regime or somebody who you weren't teammates and super close to. I think he was able to have those in-depth personal conversations with Alexander Steen because of their relationship, and it got them into a good spot.
I made this comp to JR when we had him on after that drop piece or his piece dropped. And the first thing that I thought of when I read that article was it reminded me of the conversation we found out that Alex Steen had with Doug Armstrong when Paul Stastny was traded away. People may have remembered this, may not, but just in a nutshell, Steen was pissed that Doug traded Stastny away because Stastny was a buddy of his and they were close to the playoffs. And Steen had said, like, we had a really honest conversation with Doug of like, look, where's this going? Because if you're not going towards a cup, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, I want to be a part of a championship. And Doug promised him, like, look, we are building towards something. Just please be patient with me. Mm-hmm. And we all know what happened, 2 years later. They won the Stanley Cup. They made those moves for O'Reilly and Bozak and Perron and Maroon, and they won the Cup. It really felt, reading that article that JR did, Thomas had the same conversation with Steen that Steen had with Doug Armstrong of, where's this going? Mm-hmm. I was on the trade block. Now I'm not. Are we building towards a championship? Because that's what I want to be a part of. That's what I've committed to. And if they're in a comfortable position, the plan that was placed in front of Robert Thomas, I wonder how much it resembles the plan that was placed in front of Alex Steen. Yeah. And in the back of your mind, you have to wonder if Steen's thinking of those conversations he had with Doug Armstrong. So I was fascinated by it. It's a good feeling to have. And I think a lot of people are a little bit more calmed down with Robert Thomas than maybe what they were at the deadline last year. My question to you guys before we wrap, did you read that article, or when you were talking to him, did you get the feeling that that's the next captain of the Blues?
I mean, I do, but I mean,
you kind of had that notion.
I kind of already had it in my head anyway. But also too, I could see them going with 4 assistants and not putting a C on anybody either. But to me, I just want to see more of Robert Thomas from the last couple of months of the season into this year before I would give the dude the C.
And maybe they wait for that. I don't buy that. I don't buy that they're going to go without a captain. The history of the St. Louis Blues isn't an organization that doesn't value the captaincy. And I feel like if they view a guy as a captain, I don't think 3 months is going to make a difference.
Yeah. And I can say my answer succinctly here is, with all these young players that they're trying to groom and get to the next level, those guys want to be able to look at somebody and say, okay, whose lead are we following? And whether he's got the C on or not, it would probably be Thomas Neighbors. I say put the C on him. I don't see how you tell a guy, we want you to lead us. We want you to be in charge of this group. We want these young players to emulate you, but we don't think you're good enough to wear the C.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. God, guys, I'm so ready for hockey.
I know.
Dear Lord, baby Jesus. I'm ready for hockey.
JR's excited. Now he's going back into witness protection for 2 weeks.
All right. So we're taking next week off?
Yep, next week off. And then we hope that the following week we'll have a special guest with us. We'll wait to say who it is before it's confirmed.
We don't want to jinx ourselves.
No jinxing at this point. But we do hope that as this offseason progresses closer to training camp, we're going to have a lot more guests kind of moving forward before we get into the hockey day-to-day, which once training camp gets underway, I feel like we'll be right there.
All right, very good. For Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic, Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN, Donny Fandango, thank you very much for listening and for watching. And as always, let's go Blues.
Thanks for tuning into the Last Minute Blues podcast on your home for Blues hockey, 101 ESPN.